Good evening. I'll call to order the regular council meeting for Tuesday, March 7th, 2023. For any public input?
Oh, good evening. I'm Johannes with the Lillard Chamber of Commerce. Couple of notes today. I'll try to keep it as brief as I can, but just wanted to offer comment on a couple of the items on today's agenda. The first one being our invitation, the Lillard Chamber is inviting all of you to the Business Excellence Awards that we're hosting March 25th. We will be here at the Rec Center, and as of tonight, I have 10 tickets left. So we're expecting about 120 people. And if and the invitation extends to council, it extends to staff. So if you guys would like to attend, please let me know. I'll keep some tickets in reserve. We'll have reserve tickets as well, but those are for reserves. So yes, just wanted to say that invitation. Another item I wanted to comment on was the food truck proposal that you guys are seeing on the agenda for later today. I just wanted to offer the chamber support for that proposal. I've worked with the applicant and the Salala food truck. I've personally been really impressed with their commitment and their willingness to think about different options and be entrepreneurial and really offer something that I think Lillard really needs. So just wanted to offer the chamber support and encourage you all to support entrepreneurs and new business owners that are really excited about getting going. And then two more items that I wanted to comment on were the two of the policies that are on the agenda today. That's the building permit exemption policy and the enforcement of building violations policy. And I really want to congratulate staff for creating this. I think this is exactly what Lillard needs. It's the exact step in the right direction to write out how are we going to walk through these issues and how are we going to solve these issues. And I have some detailed notes on each of the policies, but I sort of wanted to start off by saying that just the intent of these is fantastic, and especially with the exemption policy, also seeing the social media stuff that comes with it, the explanation part. I really want to encourage that. I think that's fantastic, and that's what we need. On those policies, without going into too much detail, the only couple notes that I would say on those is both of them have a discretion clause. I think that's something that's worth thinking more about, mostly because policies are intended to, I think, guide staff in really executing a vision. And that sometimes when there's a discretion clause in those policies, it sort of invalidates the whole thing. What's the point of having a policy if at any moment staff can decide to do anything anyways? While of course having some discretion is important, I think that's something worth thinking about. And then on the policy, on the enforcement of building violations, I just took note of a couple of the definitions of what is defined as a health and safety deficiency, a major deficiency, and a minor deficiency. And sort of, there's a couple questions I had around some of the terms, what's considered significant risk, what's considered limited risk, things like that. That again goes back to the sort of discretion note that there's a lot of room for causing anger and consternation with business owners if terms like that aren't sort of fully really drilled down. And so I kind of just wanted to offer that as something to think about when really wanting to make sure that these policies are effective, as effective as they can be. But those are just some of the notes I had on today's agenda. So I look forward to a great meeting. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other public input? Okay, seeing none. Approval of the agenda, including late additions and deletions. Will someone move that the March 7th, 2023 regular council meeting agenda be adopted? Councillor Bland, second by Councillor McNary. Favor. Delegations. We have a delegation, I believe, online, Agriculture Land Commission. Welcome Kim Grout and Jennifer Dyson.
Thank you.
Oh, sorry. The moment, Ms. Grout. Thank you. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Well, thank you for inviting us. This is a real treat. We've got a little bit of a PowerPoint presentation. We'll go off camera while we're doing that, but we're here to answer some questions, and Kim's going to run the slide presentation, I think, from there.
I was just going to ask if it would be possible to give me the ability to be a presenter. Right now, I'm not able to share my screen. Thank you.
So while Kim's doing that, I'll introduce myself. I'm Jennifer Dyson. I'm the chair of the Agricultural Land Commission, and I come to you today from the home of the Hopatchisat and the Sishat, where I farm and reside, which is in the Alberni Valley. I'm looking out at some beautiful snow-capped mountains, and there is a rainbow in front of me. So we'll begin this presentation. I'll go to the next slide, Kim. So the establishment of this provincial zone, which is called the ALR, is a zone that is for agriculture, and it was a very bold and fundamental change in thinking that placed a greater value on the preservation of land for agriculture for the betterment of society as a whole instead of a market driven factors. And it's really resulted in one of the boldest and visionary pieces of legislation in terms of land. We are actually going into our 50th year, which is really quite exciting. We have 6 panel regions and flexibility to move those panel regions around the province in terms of individuals, not necessarily panels. Our interior panel is made up of 2 ranchers in the area, in the one in the Savinaw area, sort of in the southern interior, and the other just a little bit of west of Williams Lake. So next slide, Kim. So this little slide here shows you the green, which is the ALR, and the regional district. So as I talked a little bit about our panel regions, we've only 5% of the land within the province is within the agricultural land reserve, or 4.9. We always round it out to 5. But what's very interesting is half of that. So half of that 5% is actually Crown land. And then it's also whittles down quite a bit further as we start to talk about what the classification. So a lot of the lands within the interior, we are around, some grazing lands, and you've got a lot of cattle within your industry. You've got some great carrots around your area and some vegetable production, but there's some really interesting pieces of land. And if we start to look at 3/4 of our province is over that 1,000 meter and more. So this particular slide here actually shows it's really difficult to read, and I apologize, but the private ownership is the blue, and the Crown ownership is the greenish color or the grayish color. And we also start to see that 7% of that 5% of the agricultural land is not even available, and it's for agriculture. It actually encompasses, if you ever look at a map, and it encompasses roads, rivers, streams, a whole plethora of other uses. And that Crown is also covering forestry, mining, aggregate extraction, recreation. There's a whole host of different things within that Crown ownership. So if we start to go into what the interior is, we see that if we go to the next slide, Kim, the interior region, you've got 9.4% of the region or the ALR within your particular region. And it's as you can see, you're quite a large area, but it's probably the least busy area of all of our panel regions within the province. And within that area, you've got 68% of the ALR region in that ALR is actually Crown ALR, and 32% is in private ownership. So we've got some real challenges in terms of how much land is actually physically available for agriculture. And, you know, there have been many areas of the province that were hard hit by some of our fires and a lot of the climate change issues. Certainly some of the issues that we hear at UBCM, you know, one of the big things that we hear from local governments is this whole food security issue and the need that kind of caught us all off guard as we had the triple header of emergencies with the fires in the summer and the heat, and then the flooding and a whole host of issues that cut off many areas of the province. And, you know, we say it fast and it sounds simple to have more capacity within regions, but the simple truth is that it takes a tremendous amount of capital and investment. And it's happening in smaller areas. We're starting to see more and more home-based abattoirs, and these are things that the Commission is certainly very, very keen on. There's also some big things in play within the cattle industry in terms of other processing facilities in terms of meat and so on. But, you know, there's a lot of things that we need in terms of agriculture. As centralization of agriculture has really moved everything to the Lower Mainland, and the wake-up call after the triple header and certainly within COVID, you know, tells us that we really need to be far more self-sustaining within our regions. So what is the ALC? The ALC is the governing body of the ALR. We're an independent administrative tribunal. So like local governments, our box is set by government. We have a mandate, and we have legislation, and we have regulation. Our regulation is very permissive. In other words, it tells you all the things that you can do. So the applications that come to the Commission are really about things that are just outside of that permissiveness within the ALR. Our mandate is around preservation of agricultural land and to encourage agriculture or farming in collaboration with other communities of interest. And a little bit later, Kim will talk a little bit about the process in terms of application. But what I like to do right now is just kind of flip over to sort of the collaborative government or governance working with local government. So the first thing to note is that the ALC and local governments have concurrent jurisdiction, and landowners have to comply with both. So generally speaking, the most restrictive rule that will apply is what, you know, somebody is applying for. We've got, you are the first place that applications come unless it's a notice of intent in terms of just a simple fill, and we'll get into sort of the bits and pieces of that a little bit later. So the next one is around the legislative framework within a legislation. This is the ideal world, but it's not necessarily the reality. Since 1994, it has been a legislative requirement that local government bylaws and plans and policies are consistent with our Act, and the our Act setting the broad legislative framework and regional growth strategies. Aligning land use designations and policies that are consistent with the Act, and then we want to see more localized plans. In the reality, it doesn't actually happen that way. It's a little bit all over the place, and it is different within every jurisdiction. We deal with approximately 153 local governments around the province, and as you can imagine, it varies from area to area, region to region, as well as capacity. It's the capacity of local government in terms of you know, your staff and so on. But I really want to reinforce that we really are just a call away. If there's questions from your planning staff, to do with your official community plans, your zoning bylaws, your regional growth strategies. That's what we're here to help raise as well. As I mentioned before, the agricultural land use regulation is far more permissive and telling you all the things that you can do. And you know, there's lots of opportunities. As a farmer, there's very little that I can't do on my land as it relates to agriculture and so many of our applications. And I'm going to hand this over to Kim in a minute to talk more about what what those application processes are. But I really want to reinforce we really truly are partners in that land preservation planning for agriculture. For many years, I think the commission, if there was even looking at processing on agricultural land, there'd be an application to exclude land. We really want to see those lands stay within the agricultural land reserve if we're looking at processing and we're looking at different plants, anything that can encourage agriculture, because once it's excluded, it's gone, and far too often those lands are then gone forever for agriculture. So we want to work together as best we can to sort of to build and to continue to build an agriculture industry, which is really the backbone of many of our rural communities. So I'm going to hand this to Kim, and she's going to get into some of the application process and our rules and regulations.
Thanks, Jennifer. Wanted to just take a couple minutes to talk about the process with respect to applications. You hear lots of language around referrals of applications to local governments. People often say they've submitted their application to the ALC when they go into our portal and hit submit. And I thought I would just clarify that we host the application portal on our website, but our statute has always required local governments and First Nation governments, as defined under our legislation, to be the ones to decide an application comes to the Commission. So if someone goes on to the ALC's portal to submit an application and hit submit when they filled out all of their information and material, the very first place that application goes is to the local government. And we at the Commission do not see that application. It doesn't become an application that the Commission starts to consider until a local government under the legislation, in the case of the District of Lillooet, passes a motion at your board table authorizing that application to either proceed to the Commission or not proceed to the Commission. Local governments have the ability to not forward an application to our agency, and in doing so, the application process stops. Commission is unaware of the file. And so you have that authority as a local government to decide what is appropriate in your community when it comes to applications that are either for something that's not outright permitted in the legislation or for applications that are asking for a greater threshold or more of something than our legislation provides. And some municipalities do referrals of those applications to the Ministry of Agriculture and Food, regional agrologists to comment. Some local governments have your own local agriculture advisory committee, AACs. If it's an exclusion application that you're processing, you have to have a public hearing. So there's various processes local governments lean on when considering an application, but you do have the power not to send that application to the Commission. Once you've passed a resolution and your staff has bundled all of the information, the staff report and the resolution, and submitted it back through the portal to the Commission, our part of the process kicks off with intake. Sometimes there's site visits, sometimes there's applicant meetings, and ultimately leading to a decision, which as a tribunal, it's not a matter of reaching a conclusion. It's actually a matter of writing a decision that goes through the analysis of all the evidence that has been provided in the application, talking about the applicable laws and clearly outlining how the Commission reached that decision based on the law and the evidence that was included in the application material. So we have a process where our commissioners are actually writing decisions. It's not simply a vote that occurs at a meeting, but it's an iterative process of evaluating that evidence as panels, in this case, the Interior panel, and writing a well-reasoned decision that's compliant with administrative law. And if we look at the application workload of the commission, annually they make about 315 decisions just on applications. We actually have a new, it's not an application, but it's called a notice of intent to place soil and fill, which comes directly to the commission, and we processed 150 of those last year. And what often isn't talked about is not only does the commission make an initial application decision, there is some reconsideration language in our legislation. Someone, if they feel like there was information that was not available at the time that they couldn't have provided or generated, but might be informative for the decision, can reach out to the commission and put that forward. But in doing so, the commission must write a decision with respect to the validity of that request and whether or not they're going to entertain it. And since the change in the legislation, 26% of all decisions the commission now makes has to do with residential requests, either for residences greater than the minimums provided for in the legislation, or more housing than the legislation provides for outright. So it's been quite a shift in the workload of the commission with respect to the types of applications we consider. And not only do we do application and bylaw review work, but we do have compliance and enforcement legislation that wasn't introduced actually until 2009. And at that time, we had one compliance and enforcement officer. We do have 7 officers in BC now, 1 officer supervisor in Kelowna, an officer located in Kamloops, an officer located in Oliver, 3 officers located in Burnaby area, and 1 officer on the island. And really those officers are located around the province based on the volume of complaints that we receive. And you can see on the slide here on the right-hand side with respect to files by region, we continue to see a very large complaint case volume generated in the south coast of BC. Almost half of all of our files come from that area. Smallest number of complaints actually come from the interior region. And despite changes in legislation to try to strengthen and tampen down issues associated with fill placement in the ALR, 44% of all the complaints to the commission still continue to be related to unauthorized fill placement in the ALR, followed, as always has been, by unauthorized commercial activity. Those types of businesses occurring in there that aren't necessarily prescribed by the legislation. And as you can see in the bottom of the slide, in the last fiscal, we had 859 active files. And as you can imagine, that is a lot of work for a very small compliance and enforcement team. So from the commission's perspective, partnership with local governments and other ministry and agencies is critical to being successful compliance and enforcement. As a tribunal, our compliance and enforcement model is very long form, orders, petitions to court. We do not have ticketing provisions like local governments do, or the ability to recover fees and fines through property tax mechanisms. Our mechanisms are largely court-driven, so we often find that some of the greatest successes we've had on really challenging compliance and enforcement files have been working hand in hand with local government bylaw officers, as well as other compliance and enforcement staff and other ministries. And just that was a little bit of a flyover of general operations, but did want to flag a couple of the more recent legislative changes that have been happening, because there's still lots of discussion about that. And as a tribunal, we don't actually hold the pen on legislation. I often get calls asking why the commission has changed the legislation, changed the regulation. We don't hold the pen. The Ministry of Agriculture and Food is the host ministry, the government ministry agency responsible for drafting and adopting legislation. As a commission, our job is to administer the legislation, enforce it, and uphold it. So very recently, there's been some changes with respect to the opportunity for there to be an additional small secondary residence in the ALR. And the determination now is largely based on parcel size and the size of the existing home. If you have only one house on the property and you have a home that either complies with the less than 500 square meters or lawfully constructed, you can have an additional residence. And it doesn't matter what that additional residence is used for. It could be farm labor accommodation, it could be family members, it could be rental. But it's up to the local government. And as local governments, you have the regulatory authority to not permit additional residences if you so choose. There are some jurisdictions around the province that have elected not to provide these provisions in the ALR, which is completely within their right. But it is important to point out that if your community wants to take advantage of these provisions, you have to permit them by bylaw. If they're not permitted by bylaw, then under the legislative framework, they're not outright permitted, and it would require a process involving the commission. And the intention of the legislation, because we often hear concerns expressed that perhaps these additional small accessory units could be larger, was really mirroring that opportunity that exists in local government legislation for a garden suite, a granny flat. It certainly wasn't looking for a fulsome secondary residence with garage and other amenities. This truly is a small secondary unit. And as I've stated, you can use it for any purpose, and you can also further regulate or restrict it based on your community's needs. And on our website, we do have an information bulletin on residential uses and what is permitted, and an FAQ document that tries to answer the questions we hear regularly about what is permitted or not permitted that might be helpful. But the legislation, of course, the small secondary unit does not address necessarily the farm labor requirements that an operation might have. And the Commission has tried to streamline our processes, in particular for temporary farm labor accommodation that's consistent with the minister's bylaw standard and is involved in a federally supported program for temporary labor. By being part of that program, farm operations have gone through rigor with respect to the determination and evidence that labor is required. And if the parcel has farm class, is of a reasonable size, the accommodation is temporary, like the ATCO trailer style housing I'm showing there, cited appropriately, it can go through a streamlined approval process that last year on average took only 13 days for the Commission to approve once we received the file. And as I've alluded to, fill was something that government was quite concerned about in terms of the large deposition of material that was regularly occurring in the ALR under the premise that it was either being used to support agricultural development or was improving agricultural viability. And we were seeing cases of like 10 meters high of fill material being placed in Richmond that by no means was improving the agricultural capability of what is tremendous Class 1 soil. Fill in our legislation means anything that's brought onto agricultural land. And there's very few instances in the legislation where someone can place fill now without involving the Commission. And the definition is very broad, and it actually captures aggregate that might be used for building construction or driveway access. So what that means is the legislation, when it was changed in 2019, limited the fill area that one could lay material down to support the construction of the principal residence to 1,000 square meter area. But the new legislative framework has not provided any permissions for fill and aggregate to be placed to support the additional residents that we were just talking about. So the Commission is actually being kept very busy with the review of notices of intent to place fill, which is a process that comes directly to the Commission to allow us to evaluate compliance for structures and uses that are outright permitted but might require fill. Last year, we considered 159 of those applications. So just a bit of a flag with respect to the processing of permitting for these structures and others that don't have permissions to place fill. There is a process that very likely might need to involve the Agricultural Land Commission. And the legislation was amended in 2022 to speak to controlled environment structures, often referred to as vertical farming in the ALR. It is, of course, the intensive production of a crop. Intensive production of crops is permitted in the ALR, but there was a lot of confusion and in some cases concerns from local government about the paving over the ALR, to use a quote from a local government, by wholly enclosed structures that were providing all of the light and nutrient required by crops in a fully automated and enclosed way. So government came out with clarification to state that while farming in a controlled environment structure is of course farming, Local governments can prohibit these structures should they wish to. I mean, expressing concern about, the loss of prime agricultural land, for example. The commission can't prohibit it, but a local government can. This isn't too dissimilar to some of the legislation surrounding cannabis production, where local governments can't prohibit outdoor growing of cannabis as a field crop, but can prohibit and regulate the size and placement of cannabis structures that are wholly enclosed on concrete foundations. And that was just a bit of a quick flyover of the legislative framework and the application processing for the commission. And I'd be happy to answer any questions, and I'm sure Chair Dyson would as well.
Oh, come on. Now, we can't hear anybody, so
Are you able to hear us now?
Oh, sorry, we can't hear anyone. Or maybe we can very faintly.
Yeah.
we're struggling to
How
hear.
about now?
Oh,
Oh, there we go.
Okay, everyone speak up.
Yell.
Yell at us.
All right, I will try. Ms. Gout, Ms. Dyson, thank you so much for coming to introduce the ALR to this council. My question is, what is the ALC doing to make agricultural land more accessible to starting young farmers, as agricultural land is becoming so expensive? We need these young starting farmers so desperately for the future of our food chain, as many existing farmers are aging out. While the ALC is protecting large parcels costing millions, means that agriculture will become dominated by large corporate farms that export food rather than feed local communities.
We hear you loud and clear, and I think there's some interesting things that can be done. So let me speak to you as a farmer, probably less so from the commission. The commission doesn't have an awful lot to do with holding land for or managing land. I think years and years ago there was a little mechanism that we could get new people on, but there is a land matching program within the province, and there's many farmers like myself that provide opportunities for that next generation. I know a number of ranchers within the interior that are also doing the same thing. I mean, it is a huge challenge, and I think that we're certainly seeing it. When I've spoken to the cattlemen, we're seeing a tremendous amount of influx of transfer of ranches, and it's going to build larger ranches, and it's a concern for everyone. So I think it's maybe something that we should try to get the Ministry of Agriculture in touch with you in terms of the land matching program and some of those kinds of incentives. It's a way for existing farmers and ranchers to actually bring another generation onto the property, and it provides some legal framework and a whole host of different things. But it's a challenge, but I think it's something that communities, and certainly us working to provide, whether it's other homes, if it's a smaller property and you've got somebody that needs to do something on that piece of land. I mean, those are the kinds of things that we're here to talk about as well. Kim, I don't know if you want to add anything.
Maybe I would just add on that, of course, ownership is not something the commission has any control or authority over. And, we often hear discussions about the utilization of ALR, and I often suggest that people look at who owns ALR when it comes to utilization. But I think, one of the, in 2018, then Minister of Agriculture appointed an independent committee to look at ways to revitalize and strengthen the legislation. And the very issue you're talking about was spoken to in that report. I think that's some of the force behind the land matching program, where farmers who are looking to retire out, or even landowners that have acquired land and don't necessarily have the intention to farm, can look at legal mechanisms to transfer some of those opportunities to the next generation, which isn't always young. Sometimes some of our newest farmers are second career farmers that are looking to change their lifestyle, and we're happy to provide you some context. But I know government is struggling with that question of ownership. We see land being bought by major pension corporations because 3 times a day we need to eat, and food security, food resiliency, and food future is so important. We have other countries that are acquiring land in BC to support food production elsewhere even. So that's on government's radar, but as a tribunal, we're just vested with administering the legislation we're provided. But we're very committed and interested to those broader dialogues that go on with our ministry colleagues and others. And we really look to local governments to keep raising the profile of some of these issues, because you often see them at the local level and know them very intimately.
And the other opportunity is leasing. We have a couple hundred acres here on the island, but we also lease around 400 acres around our valley, and to provide forage, and so it's mainly for forage crops. But we're seeing more and more people moving into our area that do not farm, and there's an opportunity for many of us as farmers to try to lease, but we need long-term leases, not just year by year.
Very important issue. Thank you.
Another problem that small farmers such as myself are having is dealing with the government every year to make sure that we can keep our farm status going all the time. It seems to be a big problem.
So that is BC assessment, but I'll let Chair Dyson go. Sorry, Jennifer.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing, because I think, it's one of the challenges, and we've talked about this many times, and we are certainly happy to pass it along as well. There are some really great papers on this whole issue of taxation. Many of us as farmers keep saying, raise the threshold, but you've raised a really good point, because many people are saying it's too high, or how do we maintain that? And I think that vigor in which, if it's an issue maintaining that farm classification, you may have more of a supervision. I don't think I've had anybody from assessment visit me for almost 20 years. So it's something that doesn't seem to come up year by year, but it is getting your land classed as assessed as farm. It may be a challenge to begin with.
Mhm.
Does that answer your question? I'm sorry.
No, not really. They just seem to bother us every year. Like, we make the class all the time, but
Oh.
we have to go pay an accountant and whatnot to go give them a bunch of numbers to make it work.
Oh, that's really interesting. I mean,
Yeah.
unfortunately, farm classification and assessment is not in the commission's purview, and what we know about assessment is only from commissioners and staff that have land and deal with those issues, much like yourself. But that's really interesting. That isn't the most common dialogue, but the revitalization report that I mentioned from 2018 by the Independent Committee, largely of farmers, was raising the issue of farm class, and at least having it reviewed. It's my understanding the process behind it hasn't been looked at since the early 90s. And as you know, times are changing. So regardless of which direction it goes, it would be great if government took a look at income thresholds for farm class.
But you should not have to have, you do not need an accountant that sends in receipts. I mean, that seems a little odd. So now, do you have an ag advisory committee within your community, or no?
I know I've had problems with it, and in the 1 year I tried to send it in myself, and they refused it, and then we had to go to the Agriculture Land Commission and go through it all again and get an account to put everything together, and then we got our status back.
No, not us, but
Yeah, we don't have a role in it.
Yeah, but I think that sounds very odd. I think you know,
Another guy in town, he has the same problem every year and he's running 30 head of cows.
yeah.
Yeah, that's unusual. Because like for example, my father farms outside the ALR and has farm class. Because farm classification, has to do with taxation, not whether you're in the ALR or not. So that's really interesting. I haven't heard of anyone having sort of that annual issue with BC assessment.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. We do have a contact with these assessments.
We're having trouble. If there was another question, just speak up.
Sorry, I was just saying that we have a contact with BC Assessment. We'll forward that question to them to provide.
Please do. Yeah.
Yeah, that would be great.
I have one last question if nobody else does, and it's probably more to staff, but regarding the second home that can now comply on ALR land, but must be permitted by bylaw. Would that mean that anybody wanting to put a second home on would not need to come for with a variance if we had a bylaw in place?
Madam Mayor, the new zoning bylaw is going to be taking all of these new provisions from the ALC. We're actually going to be having an ALR zone.
Okay,
And the ALR zone, much like the ALR, is going to be, if council adopts the bylaw,
Right.
is going to be permissive as well. So generally, if it's considered favorably in the ALR, it will be included in the ALR zone in the zoning bylaw, which will mean that if it's permitted use, they can just apply for a building permit. They won't need a rezoning or not part of this application.
okay, thank you. Any further questions?
Well, I'll just give you one last thing that there was only 7 applications that were outside of a bigger home on ALR land. Excuse me. And 6 of those were approved and 1 was declined. So there has not been many.
Louder. Okay, thank you very much, Kim and Jennifer, for your
Oh.
delegation. We really appreciate it.
Thank you. Good luck with the rest of your meeting.
Bye now.
Bye. I don't believe we have any public or statutory hearings. So we'll go on to the adoption of minutes. Will someone please move that the February 14th, 2023 regular council meeting minute be adopted as presented? Councillor DeBruin, seconded by Councillor Reeve. All in favor? Carried. Any business arising from the minutes? Any rise and report? Okay, we'll move on to correspondence and petitions. Ask, does anyone wish to remove one or more of the 5 correspondence items under 9.1 of the agenda? Please raise your hand. I'll remove number 1. I think we'll put that to 19.1, yes? 18.1,
Sorry, 17.
17.1? 17.1, yes. Okay. I don't believe we have any reports from committees of council or commission.
So we need a resolution to accept the rest of the correspondence.
Someone make a motion that we have received. Councillor DeBruin, seconded by Councillor Plant. Favor, thank you. Okay, moving on to 10. I don't believe we have any reports from committees, council or commission. So reports and presentations back.
I'm on general because apparently it's kind of now. Thank you, Madam Mayor. So this is for an occupancy increase for a liquor license, and this is on page 29 of your agenda package. This application comes to us as a referral from the Liquor and Cannabis Regulation Branch for the increase in occupant load for the brewery at 104 Main Street. The LCRB refers all applications for liquor licenses or liquor license changes to the local authority for comment. However, if the local government wishes to provide comment, they must undertake a public process to gather input. There are certain considerations the local government must make prior to providing comment, including the location of the establishment, the capacity and hours of liquor service of the establishment, the impact of noise on the community, the impact on the community in general, and the views of the residents. Most of these considerations are not changing from the approval that was given in 2021. The response from council for that application was that noise is not expected to be an issue because of the seasonal nature of the outdoor portion of the establishment, and that the district's nuisance bylaw already has provisions to address these concerns locally. That the impact of the business is generally considered to be positive for the community, and that the characteristics of the neighborhood would not be impacted by this use in this location. The public process included a notification sign on the property and an advertisement in the newspaper. In total, 25 responses were received from residents, with all 25 in support of the application, citing the business as generally favorable for the town, tourism, employment, and industry growth. There were no submissions of verbal concerns in opposition to the application. Staff have also not received any complaints related to the operation of this business. With all of that in mind, staff are recommending that council opt out of comment on this application and return the application to the LCRB. This will allow the process to continue, won't put the onus and cost of public notification on the district. If we do opt to provide comment, thank you.
So can I just ask, what do you need from us?
I
Did
just
we
need-
make a motion for the staff recommendation?
That's correct.
Okay. Can I have a motion for the staff recommendation that the council of the district of Lillooet has considered the following: the location of the establishment, the person in capacity and hours of liquor service, and will opt out of providing comment to the Liquor and Cannabis Regulation Branch, and that the increase in occupant loads to the Lillooet Brewery at 104 Main Street is generally supported. Councillor Weed, second by Councillor Mary. Any further questions? All in favor? 11.2, campaign financing disclosure statements for 2023 general local election. Failure to be filed.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. This is on page 34 of the council agenda. In what is hopefully my last duty as chief election officer, I must deliver one final report to the local authority. As I am sure everyone is aware, the local election campaign financing act requires that candidates file a campaign financing disclosure statement within 90 days after general voting day, being January 12th of this year. If that date is missed, disclosure statements may still be filed for another 30 days, but are subject to a $500 late filing fee. The last day to file the fee this year was February 13th, 2023. Should the state be missed, then section 61 of the LECFA, the chief election officer is required to present the names of any candidates that did not file a disclosure statement within 120 days after the election to an open council meeting. This report today is to comply with that requirement. To that end, I have been informed by Elections BC that one candidate, Mr. Omar Chin, did not file the campaign financing disclosure statement with a $500 late fee within the filing period. As such, Mr. Chin will be disqualified from being nominated or elected for the District of Littlewood Council, the Council of another municipality, Regional District Board, Board of School Trustees, or Island Trust until after the 2026 general election. Madam Mayor, I ask the council receive this report for information. Thank you.
Thank you. So could I have a motion to receive that the staff report dated February 15th, 2023, titled Campaign Financing Disclosure Statements for 2023 General Election, failure to file be received for information. Councillor Reed, second by Councillor Plan. All in favor? 11.3 DS.02C Building Permit Exemption Policy. Mr. Taylor.
Madam Mayor, this report starts on page 40 of the council agenda package. Under the municipal goal of review bylaws to streamline development and general direction from council, staff are presenting policy DS02C, building permit exemption policy. For some history, in June of 2021, council adopted the reviewed building bylaw number 2021-006. It was intended to replace the 2003 bylaw, which had not had a substantive update since it was adopted. The general update, however, did not add much in the way of new inspections or requirements and just updated language and was reviewed to ensure compliance with the Building Act. I have attached the report that accompanied that bylaw to your agenda package for reference only. You can find it on page 44 of your package. I have provided this and want to assure council that the bylaw is no more restrictive than the 2003 bylaw. What has changed is the service level provided by development services to enforce the bylaw and the building code. This has led to the perception that the rules have been stricter, when the reality is we just have the resources to do our jobs. We haven't done much in the way of policy work since the election. I'll give a brief overview as to the purpose of policies and how they interact with bylaws. There are only two mechanisms used to enact policy: resolutions or bylaws. This is authorized in section 122 Community Charter. Certain policy decisions may only be enacted by bylaw, and others may be enacted by either bylaw or resolution, and all must be done in an open meeting. Bylaws are impersonal, address the public at large, and applying to all persons who fall within the description. Policies, practices, and procedures are used by the municipalities and must not contradict any bylaws that are in force. Think about bylaws as the legislative skeleton and policies and procedures as the skin and flesh over it. A bylaw would set the rule, and the policies would flesh out the where, when, why, and sometimes how of the regulation. An example of policy framework with these items all working together is a bylaw would determine that a municipal engineer is responsible for determining road closures. A policy would have a set of factors for determining when to close a road. Practice or procedure would be when the engineer would tell staff which roads to close and how it would be signed and barricaded, and the report would explain why certain roads were closed. At a broad level, a policy should include whether or not government should intervene in a particular issue area, a decision with regards to goals or objectives or government involvement, determine the best available means of achieving those goals and the instruments to be used, and decision to maintain, alter, or discontinue the chosen course of action once evaluation of its effectiveness can be undertaken. By way of simplifying this as much as possible, a policy is a course of action adopted by council. The purpose of this policy is to provide clarity to the building bylaw regarding what renovations and repairs that are regulated by the BC Building Code will not require a permit nor receive inspections from the District of Lillooet unless the context of work affects other structural, fire safety, or life safety aspects of the structure that would otherwise require a permit and receive inspections. District staff have identified a number of items that are regulated by the BC Building Code that could reasonably be exempted from permitting requirements. These items similarly are not required by the SLRD, and it seemed prudent to keep some regional consistency. These items are recovering of existing roofs, provided that no structural changes are made, resetting exterior walls, provided that no structural changes are made and that there is no addition of insulation being added that would require a permit. Replacing existing bathroom, kitchen, or laundry fixtures and fittings in the same location that they already exist, and replacing windows and doors in existing openings. Any changes in size of those openings would require a permit as it would affect the structure. The policy also explicitly states items not regulated by the BC Building Code that we sometimes receive questions as to whether or not to require permits. Those items being installation of cupboards, landscaping, subject to any retaining wall requirements, sidewalks or walkways within a property, fences, buildings less than 10 square meters in size, and farm buildings on lands designated or zoned for agricultural use with farm status. All items must still, however, conform to local zoning regulations, and we still encourage those undertaking construction to check with the office prior to the placement of any structure. Staff are recommending that Council Policy DS02C be adopted. Should Council resolve to adopt this policy, please see pages 50 and 51 for examples of some of the communications media that the department will publish on Facebook, the website, and the newspaper. Further, staff will develop a one-pager to hand out with building permit applications to disseminate the information to the contracting community. Thank you.
Thank you. Questions for staff? Councilor McIntyre.
How many more rules is this gonna put on us? In the actual prop, that's my,
I think they're taking it all from now on.
they're taking it off,
They're taking-
but it seems like.
11.4.
We're on
But
page
this one-
29.
This one is removing the permits, the windows.
Yeah.
So I think it's,
It was just confusing, like, the enforcement and rules and responsibilities and stuff like that. And then you went to the previous report. It's, just hard to understand this. What they're exactly trying to do, other than, you're gonna take out the windows and roofs and stuff like that, that'll get them the building permit. What else was in there? That's adding more rules to our building permits and whatnot.
In this policy, this is reducing the requirements. That we're not considering adding anything on top of, and by policy, and under the Building Act, we can't really add anything on top. So this is clarifying for staff and for the community, those items that while they may be regulated explicitly under the building code, may not necessarily affect the renovation of which may not necessarily affect the life safety or the any structural components of the building that would necessarily require the local government to provide approval.
Councilor Reed.
Through the mayor, I'm just curious on the bathroom one. So replacing existing fittings and so on and so forth. So if you were to take a tub shower combo out just to put in a big walk-in shower, if you're using all the same plumbing, you don't need a permit.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. If you're not adding any new fixtures, which are not the part that comes out of the wall. Yes, that's correct.
I think.
Councilor DeBruin.
First of all, I would like to thank staff for bringing this proposed policy to council. This new council identified streamlining bylaws that impact residential development as one of its priorities. Council with staff have discussed over the last few months a number of initiatives that can contribute towards the streamlining. This building permit exemption policy is one of those actions towards realizing this objective. Later this meeting, another policy, enforcement of building bylaw violations, is considered, representing yet another action. While more is yet to come, I'm pleased with the progress we're taking on this matter. I do have a question.
Proceed.
It's a very technical question. On page 38, this is about retaining walls. It indicates for additional clarity, a 0.5 meter retaining wall could require a permit and engineering if it meets the above criteria of access surcharge.
It's how the pressure of the, and I'm not a building inspector, so I mean, I'm sure there's a much better explanation for this, but it's how the pressure of the land affects everything else below it. So when you create a wall against a slope, it changes how the pressure comes off of the slope, and that could affect how foundation units of a structure down slope from that retaining wall. How that pressure those foundation units. So often when we have retaining walls that are close to houses, or if they're over a certain height, an engineer has to calculate what that surcharge is going to be to ensure that you won't cause damage to the foundation of the house. So people often think of retaining walls as being just the height of the wall, and that's it. But it's it is actually the land and the material being retained, not just the height of the retaining wall. So you could have a 0.5 meter high retaining wall retaining 3 meters of 2-to-1 sloped land. It's not actually a 0.5 meter retaining wall. You have to account for the rest of that land that it's holding up as well.
I'm not sure what are fully known or.
Clearly, I don't either, but we've got a building official who can explain it to you very well.
Very well. All right.
Any further questions? All the question, and then you have somebody move that the Development Services Council Policy DF.02C Building Permit Exemption Policy attached to the staff reported dated March 1st, 2023 be adopted. No. Would you like one more question before? Go ahead.
Can I? Yeah, so on page 42, I actually have a few, I'm sorry, I'm just trying to go through all these papers. And won't make them up in digital. So I have 2 questions. So 7.0 discretion. And so the question would be, so the 7.0.1 says that the Director of Development Services or equivalent has sole discretion to require information from those parties undertaking works described in section 5 and 6, which would be replacing windows and that sort of stuff. Ensure that the scope of the project does not require a permit. I understand why in some cases you want to have information to ascertain that it doesn't indeed not require a permit. But I think the policy needs to be clear that this information is not required in every instance of section 5 and 6. So I'm not real sure when that something could be added to, when deemed necessary or when like in so I'm not real sure when that this leaves it too broad that we get an overload of people coming with information about replacing windows and roofing. What?
I think you get what you're saying.
Mr. Chairman, to step back to a question I have that might help answer this, is for this to come up, for this to occur, for staff to actually be aware of these things, I would think they would have to items within 5 to 6 would have to exist as a small part within the existing permit for a bigger project. So if you're doing a big renovation and that includes a washer replacement of a toilet, staff would know about that part that we're not going to inspect as well. It would come, these things really come to staff's awareness if there's either a permit or an actual thing that's covered under the permit, or if there's a complaint. The neighbor complains that somebody's doing any renovation work, and we would go, inspect it.
But that's not what, sorry, through the mayor. It's not what 7.0.1 indicates. It just indicates that the Director of Development Service has sole discretion. And
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and thank you for selling. Would adding the phrase, when the observed scope of the project appears to go beyond the exception, the Director of Development Services or equivalent to sole discretion.
I think that would get perfect.
Can I ask a question? I think that the discretion, I read it as the discretion meant that, like under 5.0.4, replacing windows and doors, no change of opening size, bigger or smaller, will require a permit. So in
That's
some
not
cases, then, okay.
So opening, changing the size of the opening will require a permit. Period. This is mostly just saying when people declare that all they're doing is changing a window size, and now with the new phrase, and the observed by either a neighbor or by staff that it seems to be going beyond the scope of the exception, then it would be referred to whomever the director is at the time to make a final call, or to require them to submit information to clarify what it is that they're doing.
Okay, okay. So now
I would
we
be,
have this amendment.
I would be happy with that amendment. I could go with that.
And you can make another amendment. Go ahead.
And under roles and responsibilities, 9.0.1, and council just learned about all of his roles and responsibilities while they were on at the LDLA. And the fact that members of council are not involved in day-to-day bylaw enforcement matters is something that I think is covered in the community charter. And I'm not sure whether that it specifically needs to be embedded here into this policy, or at least it could, if it needs to be, then at least it should reference the community charter as the roles and responsibilities of council are spelled in there.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. This could just be a case of beating a dead horse, and the policy won't fall apart if that is removed.
Okay. So are you making an amendment to have that removed?
Sure, yeah.
Okay, so I would then make a, have somebody make the motion that the Development Services Council Policy DS.02C Building Permit Exemption Policy attached to the staff report dated March 1st, 2023 be adopted as amended with both amendments.
Yes.
Want to make a motion? Councilor DeBruin, second Councilor Reed, all in favor? Carried. Hey, that was my first amendment. Okay.
We amended number 1. And what is we write down in the full description? Give me the sole discretion.
Sorry, it's the front of, sorry, item 7.1, when the observed scope of the project appears to go beyond the exemption, Director of Development Services or equivalent has the sole discretion to do the following. And this will be updated and sent out to council.
Right, 11.4. DS.03 enforcement of building bylaw violations, policy and procedures. To Taylor.
Madam Mayor, this is on page 52 of your agendas, and I will be referencing the draft policy respect on page 56. I've mentioned a few times in the last couple of months how the Development Services Department is now fully staffed and able to appropriately enforce the requirements of the building bylaw. There are, however, times when our enforcement needs to, at some point, conclude, and unfortunately, that is not always through voluntary compliance, which is, as always, the goal. Enforcement has been done primarily through education, requests on site to stop work and apply for a permit, stop work orders, bylaw contravention letters, and bylaw notices or tickets. However, at some point, staff resources needed to ensure compliance and the continued follow-up for enforcement becomes less cost beneficial to the taxpayers as the process drags on. In these cases, the legislation gives municipalities the option to put a notice on title to flag potential infractions in cases where it is clear that compliance is not going to be reached. We have found ourselves needing a clear and definable end to our enforcement actions, or we just keep spinning our tires for months and sometimes years on these projects. It was determined that we should have a clear policy for this enforcement action, particularly to give staff a clear procedure for undertaking enforcement, but more importantly, for ensuring that procedural fairness is adhered to for everyone receiving enforcement against them. Policy DS03C will establish the following: the model of enforcement of the building bylaw, the criteria and procedures specific to individual contraventions, and the criteria and priorities specific to receiving, investigating, and enforcing complaints and contraventions in relation to the building bylaw. In order to determine the appropriate response, as not all contraventions are equal or as dangerous as others, we've looked to set 3 categories of action: minor deficiencies, major deficiencies, and health and safety. These are defined in section 2 of the policy on pages 56 and 57. And section 9 on page 60 details the specific enforcement actions that are responsive to each type of infraction. In summary, all 3 types would receive correspondence detailing the infraction and remedial requirements and include a timeline in which the remediation should be completed. Depending on the type of infraction, notices or tickets may be issued if the owner fails to meet the requirements of this correspondence. After this, the action diverges based on the type of infraction. For minor deficiencies, the result will be to place a letter in the property file detailing the deficiency, and the enforcement action will be closed. This will allow any future owners or realtors to be made aware of the infractions and not to use up staff time in enforcing something that isn't a danger. For major deficiencies that don't have a health and safety implication, staff may recommend to council to put a section 57 notice on title. If this happens, then once the notice is registered, staff would close the file and enforcement action would cease. For health and safety deficiencies, staff will consider do not occupy orders on a case-by-case basis, and should compliance not be achieved, recommend a section 57 notice on title, as well as seeking injunctive action through the courts in order to order the remediation of the deficiencies. Notices on title, known as section 57 notices under the community charter, are a tool local governments have to register a notice via the land title office register on the title of a property where there is or has been building code or bylaw infractions, including where a permit is not held in good standing. For example, notices may be registered where a building permit has lapsed, the work has not been completed, or inspections are outstanding, where work proceeded with no permits, where permits were required, or if there's a dangerous situation. Under the bylaw, permits are valid for 2 years, and I do apologize, your report says 3 years on page 54. Those numbers are coincidentally close to each other on the keyboard. A notice on title does not restrict the sale of property. However, the presence of a notice may affect the potential sale, perceived property value, access to a mortgage, access to or cost of insurance, and potentially refinancing. The filing of a notice of contravention is not intended to be a punitive action. It is an efficient way to secure compliance with BC Building Code and serves as a disclosure mechanism protecting future property owners and other parties with an interest in the property. Section 57 notices may be removed once compliance has been demonstrated. Only council has the authority to approve a notice on title. So we have developed a standard reporting form, which is on page 66 of your agendas. This will be completed by the building official when a notice is recommended. This is the form that will demonstrate the timeline and other enforcement actions taken and will be presented to council during recommendations to file. This will also further ensure consistency and procedural fairness. I would like to note that this policy isn't necessary and staff will still bring, that if this policy isn't adopted, it isn't necessary and staff will still bring forward items that we feel should require notices on title. However, by having it codified in this matter, we ensure that everyone is on the same page when undertakings or attempting to comply with enforcement actions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Let's open up the question for staff. Councilor DeBrey.
Again, thank you for bringing this policy to council for our consideration. I note the similarity of this policy of enforcement of building bylaw, or this, sorry. I note the similarity of this enforcement of building bylaw policy to similar policies in the RDOS and other jurisdictions. I also note that the categories are consistent everywhere, so that's good to see. But for clarity, my question is, what is the desired outcome of this new policy? What is it that the public can expect? More enforcement, more transparency enforcement, fairness, impartiality enforcement? What is the desired outcome? What are we going to see?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. All of those things are what we're trying to accomplish here. The main thing from a staff perspective is to figure out when enforcement ends. At this point, we're just continuing to try and get compliance through notices, through orders from demand letters from our lawyers, and it is quite frankly wasting a lot of your staff resources. So if we have a policy that clearly lays out our timeline for when we go from education to stop work to finally registering a notice on title or recommending that council put a notice on title, then at least we and the community know where the end line is. At this point, we have the option to do a section 57 notice on title pretty much at any point, but there isn't really a mechanism to fairly apply that, and that's what this is sort of provide.
Can I ask, do other communities have this sort of a policy in place, and who are they? Like other communities that you are aware of?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Councillor De Bruin correctly identified this as the RDOS policy. This is the one I worked with while I was there, and we found that it was quite. Sorry, Madam Mayor, the Regional District Economic Development. So it's down in Penticton and in the Lower Similkameen area. And we did find that it's allowed for that procedural fairness and a little bit of impartiality in making these recommendations to council to ensure that we were ticking those boxes as we went through them. We weren't just recommending a section 57 notice or something.
One thing that I am challenged with is just the fact that some of the properties around town, like I would like to ask about individual properties, just so that I can get a perspective of what this actually means. But I can't in an open meeting like that, because I can't identify people's properties. And the other thing I'm not comfortable with is on page 53. In the first, fourth paragraph, it says enforcement of bylaw contraventions is primarily initiated on a complaint basis, but may also be enforced when a deficiency is discovered by an employee during a regular course of their duties. I mean, does that mean when the garbage truck is going past and he can say, hey, there's, you know, this going on, like, I don't know where that boundaries is.
That is, the intent of that is more geared towards the building official, noticing these deficiencies.
But it doesn't.
However, if someone driving a garbage truck drives by and notices that someone has taken out half a wall out of their basement, that should be reported and we should take action.
But is it half a wall, or is it a trailer in a backyard, or is it a vehicle that's not licensed? Like, I'd like to delve more into this. And I would like to see it just kind of postponed so that we can have that time to do it. We've just been, we've got a lot right now with our financials and everything, and I just. This one that I don't know that I could, again, ask in an open meeting.
I kind of feel the same way. I don't think a bunch of green dots on here that I've got trouble with understanding it and realizing what they're trying to do here. Section 57 notice. What's it? Section 57. Where do we find that? Look at that.
Madam, that's section 57 of the community charter. To address Madam Mayor, something you did just say that you have questions about individual properties. That's the whole point of this policy, is to not consider things individually, to consider them on the merits of the discrepancy. Sorry, deficiency.
Say that.
I said that, some of the questions that the mayor was asking were about specific properties. And the whole point of this policy is to impersonalize the process. And review every deficiency sort of by the definitions that are set out in here, not by whose property it is or how long it's been going on, or whether they're a new resident or a resident of 50 years. It's taking that discretion out of it.
And by saying that, I have, my examples here. But they're properties that, it's not them that own it, it is the example that I need.
I suppose what I would say to that is this policy is coming forward because we've been hearing from a lot of people that we're just enforcing, but they don't know when it ends and they don't know what the final consequence is going to be. So everything's just dragging out. So we could either go to the courts and sue everyone, which is not ideal by any means. It's expensive and it's not conducive to building a good community. And in most of these instances, with the exception of some of the health and safety deficiencies, and that comes to council as well, it won't result in any injunctive action through the courts. It's simply a registering of notice on title and then close the file. It doesn't legitimize the house, it doesn't give them occupancy or anything, but it stops the enforcement action, which is what we've been hearing. People are having a problem with that. It's just continuing 3 years.
Councilor Reed. Through the mayor. The thing that there's such policy in the Okanagan's milk meeting, whichever, is there any that's in the Par Regional District that we know of, or just curious?
Sorry, Madam Mayor, not that I know of. However, section 57 notice on title doesn't require a policy to recommend or to put on title. I'm aware of this one, and I know that it works. So I in the interest of time saving, I won't what I'm doing.
Through the mayor. I'm fine with policy personally because I don't want a sign out on Highway 99 saying buyer beware. And I think that this, having something on title that would bring it forward if someone were selling or purchasing or vice versa. I mean, I get the questionable of who's reporting what. I don't worry about the garbage man driving by. I think he's got better things to do than, you know, depending on who's in that truck. But, yeah, I'm in support of it personally.
Councillor DeGrand.
Yeah, I have a question. I understand that section 57 is available to any local government, whether they have a policy or not. So we could have implemented section 57, which is a letter on title over the last, but I guess we haven't, but this policy basically sets out, you know, a roadmap to small infractions get, you know, this treatment, bigger infractions get this treatment, and really big infractions get this treatment. So there's, you know, that nuance which I like. I guess my question is, if you look at the minor deficiencies or minor deficiencies, the consequence is a letter filed on the property file, which is the file that the local government has in the office, and anyone purchasing a property will have access to that file. So if you're selling your property, then that is disclosed. Right. Okay. So from that perspective, I'm not really sure, like, what's the difference between having a letter on file versus section 57 when both are disclosed in those situations? I just don't see what the, you know, how just a letter on file is a lesser consequence than a section 57.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. A letter on file generally won't be reviewed by, say, someone giving a mortgage, whereas title will be carefully scrutinized by the bank. So that's one of the main times is during the sale of a property, is when a lender will look at the title and notice that there is a legislative notice on title, which is intended for the larger infractions. I don't know of anyone who would put a section 57 notice on for a minor deficiency. That would be overkill. Yes, we might be able to do with putting a letter on title for a major deficiency. A letter in the property file for a major deficiency, but the whole intent of the legislation is that if we do have something that to this level does not conform with the building code or a building bylaw, that it should be disclosed in this manner. That being said, again, the policy is how staff will bring it to council. Council still has the discretion at that point whether or not to approve the notice on title.
Just I guess put it into a practical example to sort of see how it would involve in a workout in real life. Say I have a property with a carport, and in my free time I start to enclose my carport and make it into a garage without pulling a building permit. And then I put a for sale sign in my front yard and try to sell my 3-bedroom with garage. In this situation, if someone would file a complaint, or if it's observed and the building inspector or whoever would indeed notice that a garage would have been built without a permit, then I'm not really sure whether it's a minor or a major infraction would be filed against the what would be filed against at that point if I make a carport, or if I enclose a carport into a garage. What is that, minor or major deficiency?
That would likely become a major deficiency. There would be membranes, there would be deficiency to the building envelope, depending on the scope of the work.
Which means at that point, a section 57 is filed, and that something is on the title, which means that when I want to sell my home, that a potential buyer at that point sees that it's not a garage, the carport, it's actually a garage built with that building permit, protecting the potential buyer from buying something that is not perfect. Correct.
Okay, in that same circumstance, now, if this guy does this and gets away with it, and there's nothing on it, then the next buyer, like, where do we come in to be responsible for this? Like, say that's happened. And now nobody notices it, it doesn't get put on title or nothing like that. And the next guy that buys this place, and then he wants to change a window or, you know, something that needs a permit, and this pops on, where does that bring us into effect?
Where we always are, and we require a permit for that change of use and the change of structure. Any liability would be with the previous owner, or the contractor who did the work without obtaining a permit.
So bait.
Okay, so here's my example. I bought some land and I'm creating a trailer park. And I've got all these mobile homes moving in, but then I allow a couple of park trailer move in. And they're not fixed motor homes, they're just trailers. Is that right? And the district garbage truck goes past and says, you know, she's got a couple of trailers in here, they've been here for more than a month. What happens then? Or is it reported and then we start going into these places and evicting, or what happens then?
Section 57 notices are intended to be filed on structures. So these are just non-compliant uses.
But if it's a complaint basis, like, I mean, we're not allowed to have.
So normal bylaw, normal bylaw enforcement would just take over at that point.
Okay,
I just want to say I'm feeling sorry for the garbage man and
I think it's around.
No, I'm sorry. Sorry.
I did. Okay, is there any further questions?
I think it's very confusing at the moment. I'd like to look at this a bit more myself.
Councilor Reed.
I just want to go back to that through the mayor, back to the garage, because it's not just. Now you've closed in a carport, you're gonna have electrical going in there, because you gotta have lights in your garage. And then maybe an automatic door opener and all of these things, and if it's not taken care of properly, it could involve our fire chief, and on and on and on it goes. So I don't know, I'm still in favor of it.
Yeah, one more thing. They kind of answered it, the regular bylaw enforcement will take over in an instance where it's not about building code. And I've got these big binders on my desk, folder I can give you tonight, which is a whole list of policies and bylaws that John here will become familiar with. And one of them is the bylaw enforcement policy, which already exists, it's only adopted by the previous council, but it's in effect right now. And it's very similar to this, and that how it walks through the process of how the district receives complaints and acts on it in an orderly and fair fashion. And it already includes that if anyone, council, staff, and general public complains about a bylaw infraction, whether it's the building bylaw or any other bylaw, we take certain steps to resolve it or bring it to council. So this here is just more of what we should be doing, is having clear and fair instructions to how staff should be responding to this. So without this policy, staff are left to their own devices when we don't have that fairness or clarity. But ultimately, as things get really serious, this is just our instructions of how to bring it to you to make that final decision.
That being said, even without a policy, we're always going to strive to be fair and clear. But this is also creating some consistency, moving forward. If there's ever staff changes, that this will be the policy that will be followed. Now, if there are any more choose your own adventure scenarios,
Oh.
Everybody needs direction. It seems to me like. It seems like a good idea, but at the same time, it seems to me like there's more cake to it. And that's what we're trying to avoid.
Madam Mayor, I'm going to go ahead and disagree. I feel like red tape, as I keep hearing, comes when there's not a process in place and things are kind of being made up on an ad hoc basis. And that's when people say, well, I don't know what they're asking me to do, but they keep changing the rules on me. Things are more streamlined when you have a process to follow and basically a checklist to go through. This isn't putting anything on any resident. This is a policy for the direction of staff action for scenarios that are already occurring.
Can I ask, if we pass this tonight, or if this is passed, could you bring back a report in 6 months just to give us an overview of how it's working or what we're doing? Because we don't have a bylaw officer, no offense. Cover that guy over there. But I mean, that position is out there. So like enforcement is going to be more difficult. Or again, you're thinking this is going to streamline it?
Yes, Madam Mayor, I think this will streamline it. I think this will take some pressure off of bylaw enforcement because most of this process is being run by development services staff and doesn't get into the bylaw enforcement except for maybe some letters that need to be sold at some point.
Okay.
I would ask that you give it a year, not 6 months. I don't actually anticipate that we're going to be suddenly having a deluge of these things. Again, if we had any that were going to come up, I would have brought them forward at this point. It's coming forward now because we do have some permits that are getting to that expiry point. And that I am planning to bring forward for 57, whether or not this is in place or not. But this is going to give us that nice process to go through.
Okay.
And regardless, if you defer this policy today and want to think about it, bring it back to a future council meeting, we're going to start using this form anyways, just internally to work out some kinks. So it's not going to set us back. But I'm going to continue to recommend this policy.
Okay. Well, like I said, if it costs me, then I would just ask that you bring it back at a later date and. So,
The policy development and review policy does require that we review all policies on a certain schedule, so I can make this one be a bit more of a common occurrence. That's how I run the
right.
policy.
Historically, we're not great at that. That was not our forte, but past years.
I think that I like your idea of you using this policy yourself personally without us adopting it right now to see how it's gonna work. As soon as we adopt something like this, it's hard to adopt it. I'm in agreement with that.
Apologies, I'm going to disagree again. Sorry, Counselor. Again, policies, not bylaws, and bylaws you can even rescind with another bylaw. Once the policy is in place, if you want to change anything, if you want to rescind it, it's a resolution that does it. It's actually a rather simple matter to remove from the codex. But if there's still some apprehension, instead of voting it down, I would ask the vote to defer, take some time to read it over, ask staff questions kind of the next few weeks, and we can bring it back at the March 21st meeting.
2 weeks. Making a motion?
Yep, I'll make the motion to defer this decision on adopting enforcement of the building bylaw policy until the March 21st meeting, so that council is able to review this and provide some feedback.
All in favor? All opposed?
It's ready to adopt it, sorry. I reviewed it.
All right. Look forward to the third. 1.1. Z 23-002 zoning amendment by law number 2023-004 to allow site-specific carriage home in R1 zone on private subject at 317 Taylor Road. Taylor.
Anybody else work here?
No. No. You're in.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. So I'm not going to get too detailed with these next two site-specific zonings. Similar zonings have been before you a number of times in the last few months. For Z 23-002 on Taylor Road, the applicant is looking to allow for a carriage home and principal dwelling to be permitted on septic with the accessory dwelling sited in front of the principal dwelling. The proposed amending bylaw would add this as a site-specific provision. Again, I will note that these regulations are going to be proposed to be changed in the next iteration of the zoning bylaw. And these applicants have been made aware of that, but they are opting to apply now instead of waiting for the next bylaw to be considered. Staff are recommending that zoning amendment bylaw number 2023-004 be read a first and second time, and that a public hearing be scheduled.
Questions for staff? I have one. I went on the BC assessment page and it does have a trailer in the front of in the picture. And it says the land is worth 190,000 and the buildings are worth $700.
Madam
Or is
Mayor?
the trailer gone?
No, the trailer is what is going to be the carriage home. And that is a question that I can't possibly hope to answer, but I can shoot it off to BC Assessment for their comment.
Yeah. Sure. I think that's really weird that it's. I know, but $700? I'll buy it.
And I remember, as BC Assessment does not set the market value of anything, and they often miss what's up. They were just here to do a full review, I think, in 2019. So they either missed it at that point or they thought it was beyond any appreciable value. Again, I'm just speculating.
Right, I just thought it was weird, because actually it has a picture of the trailer, and then it says the year built 1969. Description, shed and outbuilding, again, land 190 and building $700. I just thought it was very strange, so we're sure who was. That was my only.
Take your internet away?
I love BC assessment. I do. Okay, so no further comments or questions? Okay, will someone move that the District of Lillooet zoning bylaw 2018 number 454 amending bylaw number 2023-004 be introduced and read a first and second time, and that a public hearing be scheduled. And further, that staff give notice to the public hearing in accordance with the requirements of the Local Government Act. Councillor McNary, seconded by Councillor DeBruin, all in favor? Carried.
Maybe, yes, where's the?
4.2. Then 23-003 zoning amendment bylaw number 2023-005 to allow site-specific carriage home in RR1 zone on private septic at 355.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Everything in the last application is also relevant to this application. The staff are recommending that this application also proceed to public hearing. Just a few key images on this lot. We have an existing shop on the property, and they would, an existing shop with a dwelling unit, and they would like to build a new house behind it. Due to the topography of the lot, there isn't much in the way of other options for the building location. You notice the steep slope behind them. And as I've said many times, they have very persnickety around slopes, and they would prefer that they build it off of it without having to affect the bank. There are 2 shipping containers on the property that will either need to be removed before the rezoning is complete or applied for permits to keep. This would involve an engineer and possibly a variance, as these containers are not prescribed in the BC Building Code. Staff recommends that this application be read a first and second time and forwarded to public hearing.
Thank you. Any questions for staff?
The containers, are they, permanently fixed or what's the problem with the containers?
The bylaw does not allow containers to be laid out in a row with each other, and they do need to be on a certain type of material. It's either a hard pad or a gravel crush. Sorry, I can't remember right now. I believe on the zone, a single container is permitted, but they have more than one. So they can either turn them into a structure, which would require an engineer, they can remove them, or they can bring them otherwise into compliance with the zoning bylaw.
Yeah, I was just wondering for my.
Yeah.
Also a container, does fall under the definition of a building or structure. So it, according to the bylaw, needs to be behind the principal dwelling, which is where the variance would come in, but they didn't indicate, one way or another.
Is there a solution for them on that, other than taking it away? Because they're very good storage with a lock on them.
Yes, but again, solutions are what the applicants need to come up with. We could say whether something conforms or not. We're not going to start giving them a choose your own adventure on how to solve it. We'll tell them the end of how it will be solved, and then they'll tell us how they're going to solve it. The issue with storage containers is that while they are wonderful, and I don't want to get too into this because this isn't about the bylaw, but the issue with storage containers is that they are hazards, especially in fire response. They're basically contain pressure cookers. And if they even just get heated in the sun, or if there's a fire that they have to respond to, and they're not properly vented, they can and have caused serious injuries to first responders.
Any further questions? Okay, seeing none, will someone please move the District of Lillooet zoning bylaw 2018 number 454, amending bylaw number 2023-005 be introduced and read a first and second time, and that a public hearing be scheduled, and further that staff give notice of the public hearing in accordance with the requirements of the Local Government Act. Councillor Weed, seconded by Councillor McNary, all in favor? Right. 12.3, food truck at rec center request, license and occupation, Mr. Taylor.
A second here. Thank you. So the district has been approached by a food truck looking to operate in Lillooet since 2019. Eventually, staff were directed to undertake a zoning bylaw amendments to allow for the food truck in the C1 zone. After this was passed, the Ministry of Transportation indicated that they wouldn't approve any food truck licenses on Main Street. We were informed of this in 2022. Staff contested this decision as the bylaw was approved in a referral to the ministry, but no approvals were given. As council has been generally supportive of food trucks, they have the truck in question has requested to be able to set up at the location where the farmers market is held by the rec center. While this was not the intent of the council direction, it was made clear to staff that council wanted to see this supported. Due to the election and staff absence, we weren't able to bring this forward in the fall, but we did give assurance to the applicant that we would seek council permission in the new year. Staff are asking council for permission to enter into a license of occupation for one operating season and then report back to council in late 2023 or early 2024 about the operation and a recommendation about whether to continue. There's a letter from the proponent on page 89 of your agenda packages. Thank you.
Thank you. Counselor.
I got questions. Okay, I like food trucks and I'm all for new business, but I do have some questions. From Miss Lord's letter, okay, she says that this is an ideal permanent location. Now, is she meaning, okay, and also I know we probably won't have answers to all of these now. Is it meaning that the food truck is going to be parked there permanently? Or is it that that space is going to be reserved just for her use?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. That is reserved for her use.
Okay, through the mayor.
With because it is a license of, sorry, because it is a license of occupation, there are also clauses in there for exceptions to that. We can't necessarily at all times guarantee use, because that's a disposition of land. And disposition of land is a whole other requirements in the community charter, and we're trying to sort of squirrel around that in a legal way.
Okay, she mentions that being at the rec center, it's a safe location with required parking, picnic tables and washrooms. Now, again, is with the picnic tables, is she saying that that is what she's going to be using and she's not going to be supplying her own? Because I would have concerns that there's not many picnic tables there. And with the families that use the park and the playing fields, they're not going to be available for just the regular public using that if all the customers are monopolizing the picnic tables.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. It's excellent. I don't believe that we were going to require that they provide their own tables and chairs because it's essentially a parking lot. We don't want to have people sitting in an area that's more or less thoroughfare. As for the picnic tables at the rec center, we will not be at any point giving exclusive use of that to anyone. That being said, people can walk to A&W and they'll walk over to the picnic tables. I assume that the families using the picnic tables may also be some of the patrons of the food truck. So they're not being delineated for this use, but just like with any other use, if someone went over to the bakery, they could then go over and use the picnic tables. So I think in her letter, she's just highlighting that as a pro, but it's not something that you can count on.
Okay, use of washrooms. I'm assuming that customers would be directed to the rec center. So is that going to be putting an extra workload on staff?
All of our referrals before they ever get to council are referred to any department that they could affect. It was also referred to the rec center, who came back with a positive recommendation for it. Also, the farmers market has a license of occupation for a porta potty that they set up and leave there during the summer. It's not there now because we've been taken away during the winter. But because this is also going to be in conjunction with the farmers market, at least on the Fridays, I'm going to ask that they enter into an agreement with them to be able to use the washroom and the rest of the week as well. But yes, people will be using the rec center washrooms. I don't believe that the addition of one food truck, however, is going to overwhelm our staff.
They're just questions.
Absolutely.
Taxes, our restaurants pay taxes. How does this work? Is fair to our restaurants or not, or?
Again, during the rezoning application, this did go out for comments, and we did solicit comment from restaurants in particular. We didn't actually get any, to my surprise, we didn't get anyone back with that concern, because that was one of my chief concerns when I brought it forward. No, a food truck won't pay property taxes on this site because it is public land. It's not technically an improvement, so they wouldn't be assessed even if they were on private land, just having a structure on there. However, as part of the license documentation, we will be negotiating a monthly rent that they will have to pay, as well as covering the costs of connecting to the electrical pole that we just paid for. So we have asked for a list of, sorry, my voice is starting to go. We've asked for a list of the mechanical appurtenances that we'll be using inside of the trucks, so that we calculate what to charge them for electrical. And then we'll be looking around to other municipalities and just looking at what the standard rate would be for an area of this size to be used.
Good.
All right.
Can she only operate there, or can she go like to the brewery or some other functions as long as she's not on the main street above?
This license of occupation, Madam Mayor, is specific to this location of the rec center. She wouldn't be entitled to set up, or the applicant would be entitled to set up on any other public land that includes any streets. However, if the applicant did want to enter into an agreement with the brewery, they are allowed to have one food truck there. They would be able to move at any point. They're not, it's not like it's not like when we put out a bid for someone to run a municipal concession, they're not tied to that for the entire season.
Mine was on the hydro, you know. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, that's a bunch of fun too.
Yeah. Okay, you went after mine, so I think we're good. Further questions? Okay. Can I have someone move that proposed business as described in the council report dated March 2nd, 2023, be permitted to operate on district property at 931 and 1010 Main Street, and that staff be directed to negotiate a license of occupation at fair market rent for the operation of the business for a term from April 1st, 2023 to December 31st, 2023. And further, that staff report back to council in Q1 2024 with recommendation whether or not to extend the term of this license of occupation. Councilor Reed, second by Councilor McNary. All in favor? Thank you. Hey, 12.4 to the punch here. Fees and charges bylaw number 2021-003, amending bylaw number 4, bylaw number 2023-003.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. This is my last one, and then I'm going to pass it off to the manager of recreation to button up the evening. This is on page 92 of the agenda package. In 2021, one of the municipal objectives of council was reviewing fees and charges and bringing them into a single bylaw for ease of reference and review for both staff and public. Currently, fees and charges are spread amongst a myriad of other bylaws, which makes consistent review difficult. Today, we are looking at schedules 5, 6, 8, 14, and 16 of the fees and charges bylaw with review proposals. I will start and hand it over to the manager of rec. The bylaw presented on page 97 of your agenda packages is the amending bylaw that, along with the F&C bylaw, 2021-003, amends the business license bylaw number 272, the building numbering bylaw number 162, and the recreation services bylaw number 467. These are necessary housekeeping amendments to remove the fees from these bylaws so that they can be included in the omnibus bylaw. Starting with Schedule 5 on page 104, we are looking to integrate business license fees into this bylaw. Currently, the fees are on a 6-page schedule in the business licensing bylaw where it lists every possible business type and its associated fee. The fee, however, for almost all of these businesses is $102. There is no reason to break it out like this in the bylaw, and it is far clearer to just say that a business license is X dollars and not have it tied to a specific business type. And this is what is presented to you in section 2.1 on Schedule 5. Our business license fees. Also IT. Our business license fees. He broke it the last time he touched it.
Pretty face.
Have also not been increased since 2011. However, our enforcement and inspections have. Staff are recommending an increase to $150 for this fee. We are also looking to increase the application fee from $25 to $35 to help cover some of these inspection costs and other administrative time, as well as the addition of section 3, which has fees for re-inspections if the first inspections don't pass. The amending bylaw section 3 in its entirety is what amends the current business license bylaw to move any references to fees and points towards the FNC bylaw. We are also proposing to remove wording in that bylaw that speaks to a discount, which is contradictory to wording about late payment, and removing the need to taxi companies to pay per vehicle. We don't inspect vehicles. There is no service we are providing for this additional fee. And I don't often agree when people say that something is a cash grab, but this would definitely fit that description. So we are recommending that that be removed. I will now take questions about the business license fees.
We're good.
Skipping ahead to page 104, Schedule 8 has development services charges. As with any bylaw, sometimes you don't realize what you missed until you put it into practice. In this case, there were some items that we have concurrent processes for, but not specific fees, which meant that we had to charge for the individual processes. Most specifically, when a development permit included a variance. We were having to charge $450 for the development permit and $500 for the variance. In these cases, as there is significant overlap in these processes, charging the full amount for both is overkill. We are proposing that an additional $350 instead of $500 is appropriate to cover the costs associated with variance applicants when they're combined with the development permit. So that's a reduction in fee in that case. Similarly, some of the delegated development permits don't require the same amount of staff time as they are more or less review and approve. However, we are still having to charge as if they had been referred to council. We are looking to add a $150 fee for the delegated technical development permits rather than the $200 or $500 fees currently applicable. Also, form and character development permits priced at $450. However, the minor delegated permits are generally used for changes in color or other minor changes. And will be approved if they meet the guidelines. $450 is not appropriate for the amount of work required, when we are suggesting that $100 will cover staff time and materials of producing this permit. Further, we've had to amend some permits, including some variance permits, and currently we have been charging the full fee, even though most of the work is already done. We are proposing 50% of the original cost for development variance permit extensions. Amendments and extensions. This will cover any additional mail out and council review. The reporting and research has already been completed, so staff time on these applications is reduced. As per the policy we discussed earlier and was deferred, we are proposing a fee for the discharge of section 57 notices on title. Even though the policy was deferred, I would still recommend proceeding with this fee, as we may still bring forward a section 57 and someone may still need to request discharge. And finally, a previous amendment added $750 fee for liquor and cannabis license applications. This is still appropriate. However, in instances where council does not undertake the option to provide comment and opt out, we are looking for the ability to refund $600 of that. The remaining $150 will cover staff time, preparing for council and follow-up required for the LCR. We'll take questions about Schedule 8.
Councilor DeBruin.
So this is the development services charges through them. I'm curious where the price schedule is for connections to municipal sewer, water, other things, because these are just permits, which sure, paperwork, but
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Those wouldn't actually come into section 8. Those would go into a different schedule that is for public works fees and charges that hasn't been consolidated into this bylaw yet. Currently, the connections for water and sewer are spread amongst 2 water rate bylaws and 1 sewer rate bylaw, and those are on the docket when they're reviewed next to be brought into this bylaw.
Any other questions regarding Schedule 8?
It says, when council opts out of the undertaking of public engagement, what does that actually say? Like when somebody applies for one of these?
Like with the one we had earlier today for the brewery, council decided to opt out rather than undertaking the public engagement and providing a comment. So in these cases, when we get the referral, we would still collect the $750 application fee from the applicant. And then on a staff review, if we recommend opting out or council just decides they want to opt out, then we would refund $600 of that.
Get any free beer
There's an idea.
Oh, I'm sorry. I should have said that.
So noted. Any further questions? Schedule 8. Okay, seeing none, here.
Thank you. On to Schedule 14 on page 107. A simple addition that we're asking to increase the fee for a change of address or unit number from $50 to $75. We don't get too many of these, so it's not going to be a huge influx to a great many people. As we continue work on our new GIS system and the increased costs of maintaining that, we are having to increase fees that directly relate to our GIS system. Further, the staff time required to ensure that these addresses are changed, that these address changes are uploaded appropriately and confirmed with emergency services need to be covered by the user as well. We'll take questions on Schedule 14.
Any questions? Schedule 14? Okay, none.
I will pass the lectern to the manager of recreation.
Mayor, I'd like to thank Kevin for hopefully saving the best to last, and then he goes and reduces his prices while I'm increasing them solos. What we're presenting here is that since 2019, this is the last time the recreation fees and charges were reviewed. Since then, inflation has increased 10.7, and that's having a bit of a hardship on our cost recovery. We used to be operating around 47% cost recovery through our customers, not including grants or donations. And we have since then dropped down to, I think the number here is 35.2%. So we're just trying to find ways that are justifiable to bring that back in line. There's other service charges, memberships in particular, that are in need of an adjustment due to their service level. When you factor in that back in 2019, we were operating the pool for roughly 3 months, and now we're operating it for 10. That's over 200% increase in service level. It's not fair to the taxpayer to maintain subsidy based on a membership fee that's really designed to cover for 3 months. We're also looking, and it was collective agreement was ratified by the union today, so what was included in there was a change in job descriptions that will allow us to change a little bit of our operational model and allow for increased service hours of the fitness center. So basically allowing Sunday fitness center access and extended use on Saturdays as well. So it wouldn't just be 4 hours on Saturday, it'd be about 8 hours on both days, year round. Other things to consider were that leases and sponsorships were also increased by 10% over the past year as those agreements were expiring and then hence renewed. So a lot of these changes are either going to be inflationary adjustments and or service level adjustments. When we checked various local or regional markets, in particular Whistler and Pemberton, we can compare at least the fitness center to Pemberton, recognizing that their facility is more modern than ours, so our prices are a little bit lower for a fitness membership only. And then Whistler's Aquatic Center and Fitness Center, again, are more modern versions than ours. Our pricing comes in lower than theirs. So we're not necessarily thinking that we're on par with those facilities, where customers are going to recognize that we're valuing our services properly. Other considerations in here that I've mentioned are incorporating a 10% capital surcharge into the proposed fitness center and pool prices, and those funds be allocated into a membership reserve fund so that management is able to respond more quickly to breaking equipment. We don't have to worry about coming to council because we need $8,000 for a treadmill. Hopefully, after 2 years, even a 10% surcharge would have enough in reserves already on hand, ready for such a purchase. What was the other item? Oh, the other item I wanted to draw your attention to was a proposed change in the definition of what a senior is. Currently, we define it as being 55 years of age. The average age of retirement in Canada is 64.5. Most people plan on a retirement of 65. Most federal and provincial agencies consider a senior to be 65. So we're just looking to bring that back on par with everybody else. Other than that, I know I'm bringing a lot of bad news for customers, so go ahead and on their behalf, fire away.
So you're gonna up these prices and whatnot, and you say that you're gonna have more money for expenses and whatnot? Who looks after that one?
If it was a reserve fund?
Yeah.
It would still be management, but then we're just simply requesting council to release the funds, right? If I'm not mistaken, a reserve fund regardless, we need council to approve to release it. Yeah.
Okay, so it wouldn't be just up to you to figure out, no, okay. That's good.
Oh, okay. Any further questions? Councilor Lance?
Through the mayor, I don't know if we can, I'm just looking at the campground fees for the river access and parking. We've got like single use, monthly use and annual launch. Now, for the annual launch, is that including like public and business? Correct. So should there not be maybe a separate cost for public ad versus business, as they are getting paid for their services going out onto the water?
I think the way you're thinking, I have no objection to putting in.
No, not that I want to do that,
Okay.
but, well, not that I want to sort of get businesses, but if public person is doing that, the others are getting paid for it.
Oh, I totally understand it, and agree with that. Yeah, this system, the fee and structure, the fee structures before didn't include something like that, so I wasn't necessarily willing to just jump in and throw something like that where or you're throwing in a new commercial charge on the campground, but it is something that we do with the rec center, so it is something that the public and commercial public or the commercial businesses in town would be familiar with us performing something like that.
So you could maybe look at keeping that and that lowering it for public.
Oh, yeah, yeah. So basically a discount version versus a commercial premium. Yeah.
Since we're talking at the campground fees and whatnot, I think they're too cheap. Personally, we drive down to Mexico and camp on their grounds. It was $60 15 years ago. We'll look up for $55. It's pretty cheap.
Taylor.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Just for some history, these fees were increased, I believe, 2 years ago, and then this is another increase on top of that. So we are trying to get up to some sort of markets rate, but that needs to happen in a gradual curve unless the band-aid roof.
Counselor Plan, let's go ahead.
Through the mayor, I just wanted to say, I disagree with that for the camp. We've camped for the last couple of years and these prices are similar to campgrounds that we've stayed at, which offer the same amenities as what we've got here.
Okay,
Just
Counselor
personal experience.
Burham.
Can I switch topic to,
Yeah.
from the campground to the rec center? And there's $157 for an hour on the ice rink. How is that number sort of fit with the actual expenses that run the rec?
The arena, the way we break down our expenses typically ends up breaking even. So as our expenses increase with inflation, our prices should increase with inflation to keep pace with that.
So the 157 covers ice resurfacing with the Zamboni. And
You gotta remember the fixed costs as well, like, so just putting in the ice is gonna be your big weekly expense.
Yep.
And that, I'm gonna out myself here. We don't charge ourselves for water. So, a lot of our expenses aren't even recognized with the arena. There's a lot of misconception in terms of the arena making money. It's not really, not even all of our staff waging that, or staff costing that should be applied to the arena is actually applied to the arena because certain staff members are 100% allocated to the rec building. So the way we show the breakdown, the arena typically breaks even or is close enough year after year. And so with these prices would help maintain that level of cost recovery based on historical accounting.
it's like $157 an hour just for an ice skating rink. It's just sounds like very low money. Yeah, I'm not really sure how you could keep the building for an hour without, let alone have ice and Zambonis and staff and that sort of stuff. So, but if it's historically, without allocating all the expenses to it, you're able to break even. Then, yeah. We'll keep it up, that we're charging a really fair price here. I think we may need to advertise that a little bit more, that skate for cheap. come below.
Yeah, if you try and rent an hour of ice as an adult at a commercial rink down in Vancouver, you're looking 350, 400.
Yeah.
When does this all take effect? So for the ice arena, for the hockey is just about ending, would it take effect?
We didn't actually put a date in here, I don't think.
Madam Mayor, if it is, it's only up for 3 readings tonight, so it would come back for adoption on the 21st, and then it would take effect at midnight, probably.
So it would, for the ice arena for hockey, it would take effect when they can.
Essentially, because they've already booked the ice time and it's already been charged. We've already set the price for those rental groups, the Skate Little Wet, the Wet District, Minor Hockey Association, rec, old timers, they've all booked their ice under the old pricing.
Oh,
scheme.
for the fall?
No,
Oh,
for the remainder of
This
this. ice season.
yes, okay.
And if you like for clarity, we could always just state that it'll take effect starting April 1st.
And just one suggestion with regard to these facility rates is that it's very typical to have a weekend and a weekday rate.
Yes, prime time, not prime time.
Yeah, and here we just have, whether or not the Tuesday morning or a Saturday afternoon, we're charging the same rate.
Yeah. That work in places where you have a tournament rates, things like that nature too. Where I could also go back and point out that there is a spring documents options. Always defer the item of future council meeting, give the first and second readings and direct staff to make changes to prior to a third reading. And I'm willing to take your suggestions and blend them in there.
So one suggestion that Councillor Farm had was the commercial versus rate, if you can bring that back. Work. The final reading.
If you want to direct staff to make changes, then I would ask that you give 2 readings. Ask for the changes, then we will bring back my 3rd reading, and then I'll have to go back to another council meeting to be adopted finally. Which would take us into April 4th.
Okay. Any further questions or stuff?
I have one more question.
Okay.
On the Miyazaki House, Miyazaki Heritage House. I'm just curious how these rental rates, or who actually collects the rental rates and how it works in relationship to the Miyazaki House Society that actually runs that house. Do they close their activities at the Miyazaki Heritage House while we rent out? Understanding that there's a visitor center there at the moment, so is it possible to rent the house and then have the visitor center closed, or what are the arrangements there?
Excellent, I'm not aware of that, 'cause I've never had a rental plan come through.
Chief Financial Officer available? You want me to know?
It's
Just in case you happen to know the answer to that. Regarding-
Sorry, through the mayor, I don't have all of the answer for you. The Miyazaki House Society takes care of their own bookings, excuse me, and rentals and things such as that. Pardon me. This would be if somebody came through the district requesting to rent the gazebo for a wedding or something, and we would coordinate with the society to arrange an appropriate time for that. I don't know that I've actually never had this come up at all since I've been here. So we haven't actually done anything with the Miyazaki House since at least 2015. Most of the events and arrangements are made through the society.
I think a good point is bringing in these bylaws that we bringing them all. Very to answer certain things, we obviously need agreements with the society. In that, we're keeping the time. Return air operation.
Councillor Weave, I just thought that maybe you would like to, provide any information that you might be aware of since you were.
Well, through the mayor, and I am no longer on the Miyazaki House Board, and haven't been since before COVID, and definitely haven't been since the Tourist Information Center went there. I know that when they did the rentals, they always used the same rates as the district did, just out of fairness, so that if they didn't want to go there, we want to go to the rec center, everything is on par. So, and then there was something about insurance that they could buy to you.
Mary?
How much money do we put into the Miyazaki House?
I thought it was 700 years.
To the building and the society, like how much does the taxpayers spend On the Miyazaki house.
So the be in the budget, and I don't know if our CFO has that at exercise. Part of the budget.
Last year it went up to.
But there's not just the big, society, the upkeep of the building and the ground and all that, it's probably spread across the various parts, depending on what part of the contract.
May I suggest that we take this, table this question to our committee of the whole meeting on Thursday where we discuss the budget?
Yeah.
Further questions or comments? Good, okay. Will someone move that fees and charges bylaw number 2021-003, amending bylaw number 4, bylaw number 2023-003 be introduced and read in first and second time?
Their direction on.
And with direction of for staff to bring certain or more information before the reading a third time? That's something you would like?
I didn't get from council specifically what fees they wanted to change.
Campground fees, campground versus the business versus residential.
The boat launch and parking.
Okay,
And potentially introducing a weekend and a weekday rate for the rec center.
further? For the third reading, so can I somebody make that motion? Councilor Bruin, seconded by Councilor Reed, all in favor? Sure. Thank you. 13, notice of motion. Being done, reports from them. Okay. I'm going to forego my regular roundtable of what I've been doing to talk about LGLA. All 4 councillors and myself attended Kelowna Local Government Leadership Academy last week. Besides the fact that these conferences are a huge learning curve and experience, they're about meeting other councillors and mayors from different communities to learn what others are doing. With concerns of budget, infrastructure, planning, mental health, getting a different perspective or adding choices that we hadn't thought of about many different issues that we face as a community is why it is so important for us to attend these conferences. In my first term as councillor, I chaired 1 committee of the whole meeting. In my second term, I chaired 1 council meeting. Because I had no experience chairing meetings, I'm engaging this council to take turns chairing the committee of the whole meetings, starting on Thursday. I want them to have the experience and feel comfortable to chair meetings effectively, and that's one thing I shared with other mayors, and they love the idea, so they're going to be taking that back to their communities. And moreover, I got to know these councillors in a personal way. We laughed, we shared, we at least, in my opinion, became closer. We will debate issues respectfully at the table, but I believe we will move Lillooet forward together as a team. This council that Lillooet residents created is truly in it for the best interest of this community. And I just really want to share that. Thank you. Councillor Broom.
So on February 16th, I attended a committee of the whole meeting where we listened to presentations from staff on the new 2023 budget. We had a fairly robust first discussion on the budget and the implication for the longevity of the municipal capital assets and the consequences for our taxpayers. So, and I'm looking forward to our second meeting, chairing the second meeting this Thursday to continue that discussion. On February 17th, I attended the Gold Country Community Society board meeting. The Gold Country Community Society is an organization that represents various local governments and regional districts to promote tourism activities for its members. It essentially spans from Kamloops to Lillooet, from Clinton to Licton. It operates a visitor center in Cache Creek and publishes a visitor guide. In essence, its mandate overlaps with some of the objectives of some of our local tourism-oriented organizations, such as the Miyazaki House Society, Lillooet District Historical Society, the Bridge River Lillooet News, and Tourism Lillooet. Unfortunately, the group of participating members is decreasing. During the pandemic, 2 areas around Merritt left the organization, and in the last few weeks, Clinton and Area J of the TRD, have provided notice that they no longer wish to be part of the Gold Country Community Society. The society also reported a sizable loss for 2022. With additional pending liabilities, such as the SEBA loan that are due at the end of this year, the society is currently working on a new budget for 2023 to meet these financial obligations and secure some financial viability. So that's where the Gold Country Community Society sort of sits. On Saturday, February 25th, together with the rest of council, I toured various municipal buildings and facilities, including the rec center, where we received a presentation from Director of Recreation, Brad Gilbert, about HVAC, boilers, and the ice plant. We then toured the fire hall emergency operations center with Fire Chief Darren Oiki. We finally spent a few hours with John LaRue touring the public works yard with impressive drinking water control panel. The water treatment plant and the wastewater treatment plant. I appreciated the time. Appreciate the time that staff has spent to explain the various facilities, which greatly can contribute to the understanding of all the numbers that were presented subsequently in the budget, and provide some more context to the other reports to council. March 1st, the 3rd, I attended Local Government Leadership Academy, where I attended sessions that covered topics such as exciting stuff: municipal insurance, municipal finance, climate change initiatives, communication, asset management, planning and development, code of conduct, and the roles and responsibilities of council, which is something that we just can't hear enough about. A number of more seasoned mayors and councillors shared their experiences, which was really helpful. I found it to be super useful as a conference that prepared me better to serve the public in my role on council. I pity staff, though, as I suspect that we'll have a large number of new ideas that will be coming at them.
Okay, February 22nd, I attended the AGM for the Lillooet Area Library Association. Lala, I just love that. I'm sorry, Lala. Toby Mueller, the library director, gave us a tour of the library before the AGM. It's actually been years since I've stepped foot in a library, to be honest, which is really horrible to say because my whole family are avid readers. But I've got to say how impressed I was with what the library does now. Today's library is definitely not the library of my childhood or my kids' childhood. It's not just books or movies. They've got so many resources. They've got kits, example, geology kits with rocks and magnifying glasses and testing things that the kids can just get right in there. And it's like a geologist's dream. They have so many other things. They have happy lights, or I've known them as sad lights, for during the winter. Geocaching kits, radon kits. They've even got like a thermal imager for finding breezes in your house to try and help with climate. So much stuff. They've even got paintings by local artists that you can actually borrow and hang on your walls for a period and then just exchange them out. So cheap decorating there, just change it out as your mood feels. So many things. If you haven't been to the library recently, like me, make sure you go because they've got amazing stuff there now. After the tour, the AGM commenced, typical AGM, reports, new business. Then we had the election of directors. Bain Gare has now been appointed the new chair. Jane, I think it's Dober, has stepped down from the board. Maggie Lord is vice chair, Betty Weaver treasurer, finance Paul Bland, Bain Gare, Betty Weaver, and then the interlink board is Betty Weaver as well. February 25th, again, we had all the council met for a tour of all the facilities. As Councillor De Bruin said, we toured the rec center, the proposed ESS room at the rec center, fire hall, public works yard, water treatment plant, and finally the wastewater treatment plant. Actually, Councillor De Bruin and I with Mr. Denninger and Mr. LaRue were the only ones who waived that one. Anyhow, that was all very interesting and informative, and I really enjoyed them, and it was very enlightening to now be able to put a visual with all the names that were coming across our computer screens and all the documents. I would like to thank Mr. Denninger for arranging the tour, and Mr. Gilbert, Mr. Oiki, and Mr. LaRue for taking the time out of their schedules to show us all around. And I'm still not sure if I should applaud or heckle the rest of council for ditching the wastewater plant. And then March 1st to 3rd, all of council traveled to Kelowna to attend the Local Government Leadership Academy, elected officials 2023 seminar. Being a newly elected, this is the first time I've attended anything like this, and honestly, I was a little anxious to what we were going to be walking into, but it was great. I survived. I'm really bad at guessing numbers, but I'd say there was like 250 people there, maybe more. It was an intense couple of days of presentations from speakers in government and associated with government. So many speakers, so much information, and so little time. It was actually a bit of a blur. There were some really dynamic speakers that I would actually really love to see and hear again. Real well of information infused with humor and a whole bunch of real life anecdotes. Of course, there were the few that were, yeah, you had to poke yourself with a pin to stay awake. But it was all very informative. It was a really good 3 days. I really enjoyed it, learned lots, and I really did enjoy spending the time with my fellow councillors. We have a really great group of people here at this table. And that's me.
Councillor McNair.
Thanks, that's all.
Oh.
You gotta rehear it again.
I'm with Councillor McNary. Yeah, other than the tour, which I have done 3 times, and the wastewater treatment plant twice, and I'm like, if I never see that plant again, yeah. The aroma gets you before the visuals. It's just amazing. And LGLA was, yes, it was very good, and some of the, I think the content of some of it would have been good if the speakers weren't so monotone. Yeah. Right? It was hard to keep focused, and I'm sure if I'd had a recliner, I would have seen. Most of it was really good, and I did do the survey already. Thank you.
Thank you, councillors. Okay. Administrative officer.
I have only 2 things to mention today. I don't think anyone else has mentioned them. Did anyone mention grants?
Yeah.
Okay.
Are you doing that for you?
Goody. I you were gonna steal the thunder from me. So 2 grants have come across my desk that we've been awarded. The first one, NDIT has approved us for another year of Lori Reimer as our grant writer. Also available to partner organizations that work directly with the district. So it's an $8,000 grant with $2,500 funded by the district. But she brings, a whole lot more money to the district than we spent on it. Fantastic grant writer. So that's good news. We're still waiting to hear about our economic development liaison grant. See what happens. Big one though, the province Growing Communities Fund has granted Lillooet $1,282,000.
How much?
$1,282,000. So just under $1.3 million. This is towards spending on local infrastructure amenity projects, including, for example, supporting affordable housing, upgrading water treatment systems for management, children recreation centers, or whatnot. It is ultimately up to the local governments, council, to decide what the priorities will be that grant money to be spent on. But that is the announcement. It's out there in a while now, so it's official. Got just under $1.3 million to spend on infrastructure. Send you it. I'll spend it all on.
85 million for that either.
So it's much bigger than what we expected was small communities. They have a long line of $500,000. So that's actually what we were expecting. And they gave us almost 3 times as much. We're pretty happy. But that's my report.
It's a good one.
Way to go.
For 17 new business. That was the letters that, the correspondence letter I pulled invitation to the Business Excellence Award and Gala. So I just wanted to say Saturday, March 25th, 2023, just wanted to thank the Lillooet Chamber of Commerce for putting this on. I unfortunately won't be able to attend. But, yeah, I just wanted to thank you for putting this on. I wish you well on it, and I'm sure, you know, you guys will do great. And thank you for representing our community so well. Ready to make a motion
Just to accept the correspondence.
Motion to accept, Councilor Brown, Councilor Torres, all in favor. Okay, media and public questions. Anybody have any questions? Okay, we'll move to the closed meeting for tonight. Will someone move that the meeting of the District of Lillooet Council be closed to public pursuant to the Community Charter Provision Section 90C Labor Relations or other employee relations? Councilor Reed, second by Councilor McNary, all in favor.
We have 5 minutes.